I was having a conversation with a good friend of mine who's also what I would call a millennial straggler. One of the few of us millennials who saw how broken the system was long before Gen Z totally exposed it as a scam on a mainstream level. We were reminiscing on how life was before Gen Z came of age about a decade ago, when we were constantly being pressured by our boomer parents and this bullshit consumer society to get a We had made up the decision in our minds at that point that we didn't want to work a 9 to 5 and that we never would. We didn't care if we had to sell our blood, sell our body parts, live off welfare, whatever. We would rather die than work a 9 to 5. And at the time, it really felt like we were alone in thinking this way. So you can imagine my delight when I saw Gen Z go completely viral and popularize this exact quote word for word a decade later. And that's also when I realized this next generation really gets it more than any generation before them. And that inspired the birth of this channel you're watching today. Anyways, every single day we were being nonstop harassed by our asshole boomer parents and society at large with this whole "you gotta get a job, you gotta get your shit together" nonsense. Sometimes it manifested in more egregious ways like that, but other times it was more of a passive-aggressive, "so, what do you do for a living?" And this went on until one day we just decided to wake up and choose violence, instead of the typical, "well, I'm still trying to figure things out right now." One day we just decided to be like, "hey, next time someone asks, 'so, what do you do for a living?' let's just straight up be like, 'I don't do jack shit,' and just totally own it with 100% conviction. That's right, I don't do jack shit. I don't plan to do jack shit. I don't owe it to you or society to ever do jack shit, and there's not jack shit you can do about it." And that's exactly what we did. From that point forward, no more being a good little cuck and obeying society's rules. No more thinking we had to get a job and be a good little slave to a corporation. From that point forward, every time somebody asked us the passive-aggressive, "so, what do you do?" we just proudly exclaimed, "I don't do jack shit, and there's not jack shit you can do about it." And from that point forward, the constant job harassment from everybody finally ended. It wasn't a magic bullet that solved all of our problems. We still struggled to pay rent, we couldn't find jobs, but we didn't even want to work anymore anyways. But while it didn't solve any of our financial problems at the time, it certainly worked absolute wonders for our mental health. We were no longer mentally enslaved to the idea that your job or how much money you make is the sole determining factor of your worth as a human being. That is the moment we stopped being cucks and we psychologically freed ourselves from the prison of the system. And it's so absolutely refreshing to see an entire generation, hundreds of millions of strong throughout the world, who finally get it, who finally see the exact same thing. This whole system is a lie and a scam. It's modern day slavery. Harriet Tubman once said that she freed 1,000 slaves, but could have freed 1,000 more if only they knew they were slaves. And I'm definitely not trying to compare myself to her here, but I've definitely felt the exact same sentiment with what I'm doing here on the channel. The amount of lengths older generations will go through to defend the very system that's also enslaving them is mind-boggling. But to be fair, this entire system, an entire world we live in, is set up with a very well-spun, intricate web of lies, revisionist history, dishonest bad faith arguments, all working together in an incredibly coordinated fashion to keep you an obedient little cuck to the system. But Gen Z is already deeply questioning this inherently broken system, and in my opinion, you guys are already on the brink of shattering this illusion and totally breaking free. But to get you all the way there, we have to fully debunk and dismantle all the biggest all-time myths this broken system was built upon. Myth number 1. Capitalism doesn't force you to work. Nature does. The universe commands you to work or starve. Capitalism is just one of the few systems that doesn't ignore this unavoidable fact of reality. This was a comment on one of my posts and is perhaps the biggest lie that wage slavery was built upon. And it does sound logical on the surface level, but the actual scientific evidence shows that this line of thinking is a total misunderstanding of science and nature itself. Those of you who follow me here regularly have heard me talk about hunter-gatherers a lot, but there's something even more shocking that I recently discovered that even further proves this boomer logic is total BS, and you're definitely going to want to hear this. You've heard me say this before. Before capitalism and societies existed, we didn't have to work nearly as much as we do today. Anthropological evidence as well as modern-day field research has shown uncontested proof that hunter-gatherers only needed to work about 2 to 3 hours per day to get all their basic needs met. But after researching this even further, it turns out I was actually wrong. In some cases, not only did they work way less than we do, some of them didn't even have to do any work at all for years. In 1908, archaeologists uncovered and examined the skeleton of a 50-year-old Neanderthal man who lived in a cave in southern France called the La Chapelle-aux-Saints about 60,000 years ago. What they discovered was shocking. All his teeth were missing, his gums badly infected. He had severe arthritis in his hip and spine, meaning every step he took was riddled with crippling pain. There was no way he could even walk normally, let alone go out and hunt for food. Without all the medical advancements of modern society, he should have died instantly and immediately. And yet, astonishingly, they also found many healing layers of bone regrowth on these infections and wounds, which proved he lived for many, many years with these debilitating ailments that made it impossible for him to work. Corporate cucks love to tell us that it's not the system forcing us to work. This is just how it is in nature. According to their logic, a skeleton like this should not even exist, and yet here it is. Documented, scientific evidence proving their entire premise is horseshit. Researchers eventually concluded that the only way he could have survived is that people were not only bringing him free food, they were even mashing it up for him so that he could ingest calories without the ability to chew. For years on end, he cost the tribe valuable calories for nothing. They could have easily simply let him die, and yet they didn't. And he wasn't just a simple one-off anecdote either. There have been countless similar other cases discovered after him as well. A year later, in another cave just 22 miles away, another skeleton was excavated in La Farassière, France, whose remains told a very similar story. His entire thigh bone had been snapped clean in half, and as a result, it healed in a very crooked manner. He had terrible arthritis in his foot on the same side, which suggested that he walked with a limp for years to compensate, putting an unnatural amount of pressure on that foot. And yet, we saw the same pattern of bone regrowth and healing layers, which meant he survived for years without having to work at all. Researchers concluded that the only way this was possible is if someone was bringing him free food and water for years, while he lay down on a cave floor with a swollen leg. And there are countless more similar examples of this. I've linked a source in the video description for those of you curious. Now, compare this to the dogshit modern day American healthcare system, where employers literally fire people for having cancer, where a young woman was fired from her Amazon warehouse job because she had a miscarriage, where a teacher in Texas had to file for bankruptcy because he couldn't go back to work after suffering a heart attack. And you realize that literal Neanderthals with primitive brains and basic Stone Age tools figured out how to implement universal healthcare, while these modern day corporate cucks sit up there telling you we couldn't afford it. Bernie Sanders didn't take it far enough when he called out the US for being the only developed country that didn't guarantee healthcare as a right. It's not just that we're behind the rest of the developed world, we're literally behind Stone Age Neanderthals who lived 100,000 years ago at this point. Now, if you don't believe that we're entitled, yes, entitled to better living standards than literal Neanderthals, I'm sorry, you are just a straight up corporate shill and cuck. Hey guys, we've gained a lot of ground on the most vile Gen Z hater, the Angry Guy, since we set out on our mission to surpass him in subscribers at the beginning of summer. So thank you all so much for that. We still have quite a ways to go though, and there's only a few weeks of summer left, So if you're new here and enjoying this content, definitely consider subscribing and helping us take down the biggest, most horrible Gen Z hater on the internet. Myth number 2. Nothing is free, not even in nature. This is a very important myth to deconstruct, because a lot of whether we win the ideological fight for our freedom depends on whether or not we can prove that free stuff actually exists. If free stuff does indeed exist in nature, then the idea that you should have to work to pay for something that was created for free is just straight up giga-cucked. Corporate cucks will tell you that nothing is free. And as this guy put it, there were no Section 8 caves or prehistoric EBT to swipe on. And this is Exhibit A of what happens when you get all your information from cringe alpha male podcasts instead of actual scientific evidence. When presented with the actual facts and evidence, corporate cucks will default to the rebuttal of, but they still had to work. They still had to spend energy to go out and gather food. So let's break this down. Hunter-gatherers spent about 2 to 3 hours per day gathering all the food they needed, and they got over 2,000 calories a day. Their food sources are way healthier and more nutritious than the diet of the average American, which is why heart disease and diabetes are virtually non-existent amongst their populations. It is true that they still have to spend time and energy to go out and hunt. But this isn't something that ever went away, especially if you live in America. We all know that you have to have a car just to be able to get to the grocery store in most American cities. Some genius who designed American city layouts thought it'd be a good idea to put every grocery store miles away from residential areas. Yeah, how convenient, right? We all know that you have to work 10, 12 hours a day just to be able to afford to get by now, and you probably have to spend the earnings of at least 2 to 3 of those work hours paying for car expenses, gas, insurance, maintenance, and of course, the car itself. So you still have to spend 2 to 3 hours per day working just for the ability to get to the grocery store, for the ability to arrive at the food source itself. But once you arrive at the food source, you still have to pay extra, increasingly absurdly high prices for the food itself, the base layer of food, after you've already spent 3 hours working just to be able to get there. In nature, yes, you do have to spend 2 to 3 hours per day to arrive at the food source. But once you get there, the food itself is totally 100% free. No price tag on it whatsoever. Now, a valid counter-argument to this is that the hunter-gatherer lifestyle isn't scalable to feed our current population of 8 billion people. And this is absolutely true. But this doesn't prove that nothing is free in nature. There's nothing natural about a population of 8 billion people in the first place. So, the idea that you should have to slave away 10 hours a day your entire life because some idiot thought it'd be a good idea to spike the world population to unsustainable numbers long before you were even born is once again just a total giga-cucked slave mindset to have, and Gen Z is the only generation ready to refuse it. Myth number 3. But what about all the comforts of modern society? So, if you like hunter-gatherer lifestyle so much, why don't you just move there? This is next up in evolution of dishonest, bad faith arguments up on the chopping block for us to debunk. First of all, you can't just move there, even if you wanted to anymore. Most of the land that was once free with abundant resources of food has now been overrun by cities. The hunter-gatherer lifestyle was passed down through centuries of knowledge sharing on edible plants and knowing the land around you. It's not something you can just pluck someone out of modern society and expect them to know how to do. You could make the exact same argument the other way around. If you pulled a random hunter-gatherer out of his land and forced him into modern society, he wouldn't know how to drive, how to speak English, how to fill out a resume, use a computer, or any of the stuff you need to do to get a job now either. He wouldn't make it in modern society either. And this is exactly why, despite countless coercion efforts from governments and corporations, the few hunter-gatherer tribes that still remain today are fighting tooth and nail to resist the ongoing attempts to take over their land and force them to join modern society. You could ask the exact same question the other way around. If modern society and the 9-to-5 wage slave system is so great, why aren't hunter-gatherer tribes happily giving up their land in order to join it? But there's an even greater, bigger problem with this capitalist myth that I kind of just recently realized myself, which is the idea that wage slavery even created all the modern technologies that we enjoy today in the first place. It didn't. Let's start with electricity. You know who Nikola Tesla is. Amongst many other incredible inventions, he's the one primarily responsible for the AC electric system that powers our houses today. Nikola Tesla's mindset was extremely similar to Gen Z's today. He hated the system. He thought it was a total lie and a scam. He believed that human labor should decrease as machines took over. He was saying this before computers even existed, let alone AI. After his first job in America, where he got screwed over by his boss, Thomas Edison, he refused to ever work for a corporation again. He spent his entire life living essentially like a NEET. He never got married or had kids. He never owned his own house. He bounced around living in hotels his entire life. Most of his projects were financed by grants, patents, or investors, and not by the free market. He totally rejected the idea of careers and spent his entire life living project to project. This is why he often ended up broke and never became rich despite his many talents. But the craziest thing about all this was that this was actually by design and not by accident. Tesla obviously could have been a multi-billionaire, but he specifically chose not to because he believed his inventions should be for the benefit of all humanity and not just enriching a select few. Tesla once had a contract with George Westinghouse that gave him royalties for each horsepower of AC electricity produced. These royalties would have easily made Tesla one of the richest men alive, worth billions in today's money. But Westinghouse once hit financial trouble, and so in order to save the company and ensure that AC would win the current war against the DC of his bitter ex-boss and rival Thomas Edison, Nikola Tesla physically tore up his contract piece by piece. He gave away his entire fortune because he believed the technology was more important than his personal wealth. He's specifically been quoted as saying, "Money does not represent such a value as men have placed upon it. All my money has been invested into experiments with which I have made new discoveries, enabling mankind to have a little easier life." Sounds a lot like Gen Z if you ask me. And so here we have a bunch of corporate cucks telling you that nothing is free and that you have to work your ass off to keep the electricity on. And yet the very great man who invented the electric system that powers your house right now as you watch this video has explicitly stated that it should indeed be free for all of humanity. Conclusion. So for this video, I'm going to do something a bit different. I'm just going to conclude by saying I am incredibly proud of all you guys out there fighting the system and freeing all of us from the shackles of wage slavery. You're definitely going to have a lot of corporate cucks who want to keep you a cuck and a slave like crabs in a bucket. And they're going to come at you with a plethora of dishonest lies and revisionist history like the ones we just covered. And hopefully, as your millennial defense lawyer, I've given you enough ammunition to fully debunk them so that we can keep fighting the good fight. Now, another massive, dishonest, revisionist history lie that they like to tell you is that we have it better than anyone in human history, and therefore we should shut up and be grateful. We debunk this in spectacular fashion through and through in this other video right here. Check it out. I'll see you there. Thanks for watching.